Welcome to Whispers in the Dark. If you're new, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. Get ready to dive into tonight's story. And remember, stay in the dark if you dare. The Arrival. I remember the first time I drove into Ashwood like it was yesterday. It was just after sunset when the last light of the day struggled to break through the thick clouds hanging low over the horizon. I had been told Ashwood was small, hidden, and remote, but nothing could have prepared me for the unsettling silence that greeted me. Ashwood wasn't on any map, not even Google's. There were no signs leading to it, just an old road that seemed to wind endlessly through the forest before finally leading to a town that felt like it had been forgotten by time itself. As I drove through the narrow, cracked streets, it felt as if the whole place was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone. The buildings were old, abandoned in places, their windows boarded up or shattered. Yet in some odd way the town felt alive, but not in the way I expected. It was the kind of town where people seemed to know each other, where everyone smiled a little too much and spoke a little too softly. I didn't belong here, but something about this place told me that I was meant to be. I parked my car in front of the town's only diner. The neon sign flickered sporadically, casting brief flashes of red and blue across the cracked pavement. The bell above the door jingled softly as I stepped inside, the scent of old coffee and greasy fries filling the air. A few locals sat scattered around the tables, but their eyes seemed distant, unfocused, as if they were looking at something just beyond the walls of the diner. Evening. The waitress greeted me. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but there was something in her eyes that caught my attention. A flicker of recognition, maybe, or fear. I couldn't tell. I nodded, taking a seat at the counter. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe a warm welcome or a few pleasantries, but the silence was suffocating, like the air was thick with unspoken things. "You here for long?" the waitress asked, placing a mug of coffee in front of me. "I'm just passing through," I replied, my voice sounding strange in the quiet diner. She nodded slowly, her eyes never quite meeting mine. "You'll be staying at the old inn on Main Street then. That's where everyone stays." I hadn't planned on staying the night, but for some reason her words unsettled me. There was something about the town that made it hard to leave, hard to even think about leaving. A pull like gravity keeping me in its grasp. "Thanks," I muttered, sipping my coffee. It tasted stale, but I drank it anyway, trying to calm the unease that had begun to settle in my chest. The first sign. Later that night, I made my way to the inn, a decrepit building on the edge of town. It had once been a grand place, I imagined, but now it stood in disrepair like most things in Ashwood. The peeling paint, the sagging porch, the dim light spilling from the windows, all added to the sense that this place was trapped in time. I was handed a rusty key by the innkeeper, a man who looked to be in his late 60s, his skin pale and wrinkled, his eyes dark and sunken. He didn't speak much, just nodded and gave me the key before turning back to the cluttered desk. "Room 7, he said quietly, barely looking up. I made my way down the creaky hallway to my room. The door groaned as I pushed it open, revealing a small, stuffy space with an old bed and a window covered in grime. I dropped my bag on the bed, my mind still reeling from the strange feeling that Ashwood had already claimed me, that I wasn't just a visitor, but part of something much larger. I lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts swirling. Was it the town that felt off, or was it me? The grief I carried with me, my wife, my son, still haunted every corner of my mind. It had been a year since their deaths, and yet it still felt like they were just around the corner, waiting to pull me back into the abyss. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, their smiles, the way they'd looked at me just before they were taken. It felt like a curse, one I could never escape. I got up, pacing around the room, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Then, as I reached for the door, I heard something, a soft knock, faint at first but persistent. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. There it was again, louder this time, a steady rhythm as if someone was standing on the other side of the door waiting. My heart raced. There was no one outside. I hadn't heard anyone walk down the hall. I slowly opened the door, but the hallway was empty. No sign of anyone. But then, something caught my eye. At the end of the hall, a figure stood in the shadows. A woman. Her face was hidden in the dark, but I could see her outline, her thin frame, her arms hanging loosely at her sides. I blinked, and when I looked again, she was gone. I shut the door quickly, my heart hammering in my chest. My breath came in short bursts. Was I seeing things? Had my mind finally snapped? Or was this place, this town, truly cursed? The knock came again, but this time it wasn't from the door. It was from the walls. The very walls of the room seemed to be speaking to me, beckoning me closer. I had to know what it was. The town's secret. The next morning I decided to investigate. I had to find out what was really going on in Ashwood. There was something here, something ancient and wrong, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. The locals wouldn't talk. They seemed to know more than they let on, but whenever I asked questions, they clammed up, their eyes darting nervously as if afraid someone might be listening. I walked down to the town cemetery, hoping to find some old records or something that could explain the strange happenings. But as I wandered through the overgrown graves, something caught my eye. A name. It was carved into a weathered tombstone, almost hidden beneath ivy and moss. Victor Dumont. I had heard the name before. A ghost story, whispered in the wind. The founder of Ashwood, the one who had disappeared all those years ago, leaving the town in a state of perpetual decay. But what if Dumont wasn't just some old legend? What if he was the key to everything? What if he was still here in some form, watching us all from the shadows? I didn't know it then, but I was about to find out. The disappearance. The morning fog clung to the streets of Ashwood like a second skin, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and decay. I could feel the weight of it, the town's oppressive silence, as though something was watching, waiting. The locals still went about their business as usual, but there was an undercurrent to their actions, a subtle unease that I couldn't quite shake. They weren't talking about her. They weren't talking about Samantha Harris. Samantha, a young girl who had lived in Ashwood all her life, had vanished without a trace. Her parents had been searching for her for days, but no one had seen anything. No signs, no clues, just an empty house, a missing girl, and a town that had seemingly forgotten her existence the moment she disappeared. I had to see her house for myself. I needed to understand what happened to her. Her house was at the edge of town, nestled between two sagging old buildings. The air around it felt colder than anywhere else. The windows were shut tight, but I could sense something inside, something that wasn't quite right. I knocked on the door, but it swung open almost immediately, as if it had been waiting for me. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet. The walls were lined with faded photographs and yellowing curtains. It smelled of stale air and the faint remnants of something burned. As I moved through the house, I felt a strange pressure in my chest, like I was intruding on something I wasn't meant to see. I stepped into Samantha's room, and the air grew even colder. The walls were covered in posters of pop stars and fashion magazines. The bed was made almost too neatly, as though someone had prepared it for a visitor. But there was something off about it. The bedspread was too smooth, too untouched. I opened the closet, half expecting to find something, a note, a clue. But instead, all I found was a thin, red book tucked behind a pile of old clothes. My fingers hovered over the book before I pulled it out. It was worn, the leather cover cracked with age. The pages inside were yellowed, filled with strange symbols and words written in a language I didn't recognize. I flipped through the pages, my heart racing. I had no idea what I was looking at, but the symbols on those pages sent a chill down my spine. The words on the last page were barely legible, but one word stood out: Ashwood. The door creaked behind me and I spun around, my hand instinctively reaching for my gun. But it was only Elena Salado standing in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. "I thought you'd be here," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You have to leave this place. It's not what it seems." Her words hung in the air, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. What did she know? What was going on here? Elena had always been one of those girls who didn't quite fit in. She and her sisters had come to Ashwood years ago, their past shrouded in mystery. Rumors had circulated about them being connected to some sort of criminal syndicate, but no one ever confirmed it. Elena had always kept to herself, but today, something in her eyes was different. She wasn't just scared, she was terrified. "Where's Sophia?" I asked, my voice low. Elena swallowed, her lips trembling. She went to the lighthouse. She's been seeing things, hearing things. I don't know what's happening, but I know it's tied to the light at the top of the lighthouse. I could feel the tension in the room, thick and suffocating. "The lighthouse?" I asked, trying to process her words. "What are you talking about?" "Don't go there," she pleaded, stepping forward. "Please, Dennis, whatever you do, don't go to the lighthouse. It's where everything starts and ends." I didn't have time to process what she meant. The moment she spoke those words, something deep inside me clicked. I had to go to the lighthouse. I had to understand what was happening in Ashwood, no matter what the cost. The lighthouse. That night I made my way to the lighthouse, determined to uncover the truth. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the winding path leading to the base of the lighthouse. The trees around me whispered in the wind, their branches creaking as if the forest itself were alive, watching. The lighthouse stood tall against the night sky, its weathered stone walls crumbling with age. A faint light flickered at the top, casting an otherworldly glow that seemed to stretch out across the water, illuminating the shore in strange, shifting patterns. I could hear the distant sound of waves crashing against the rocks below, but there was something else. A low hum, almost imperceptible, vibrating in the air. I reached the base of the lighthouse and looked up. The beam of light swirled around the sky, cutting through the fog like a blade. It felt wrong. I could sense something in the air, something ancient and dark. My breath caught in my throat as I took a step closer. The door creaked open as I pushed it, the sound echoing through the hollow walls. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. There were remnants of old campfires in the corners, a few scattered chairs, and an old backpack slumped in the corner. The place had been abandoned for years, yet it still felt lived in, like something was waiting here. I moved further into the lighthouse, my footsteps loud in the silence. The beam of light from above seemed to pulse as if it were alive, and I could hear the faint sound of whispers echoing from the top. I knew I had to go up. With each step, the hum grew louder, vibrating in my chest. I reached the top, and for a moment, everything stopped. The light was no longer just a beam. It was a doorway, a rip in reality. Through the glass I could see a city, an impossibly tall, twisted city full of spires and strange figures. They were moving, but not like humans. They crawled, climbed, and twisted in ways that defied logic. And then in the center of the city I saw them. The Salado sisters. Their faces were twisted, their bodies contorted in ways I couldn't explain. And they were staring at me, their eyes empty, lifeless. I stepped back in horror, the air around me growing colder. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind me. The trap. I tried to force the door open, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped, alone with whatever horrors lurked in this place. The light above me pulsed faster, its intensity blinding, and I could feel it pulling at me, drawing me toward it. Suddenly, a hand gripped my shoulder, and I spun around to find Alina standing behind me. But she wasn't the same. Her eyes were hollow, her skin pale and drawn. "It's too late," she whispered. "We're all trapped here, this place. It never lets you go." Before I could respond, I felt the ground beneath me shift. The lighthouse, the city, it was all shifting, bending, collapsing in on itself. And then everything went dark, descent into madness. The darkness was suffocating. I could feel it press against me from all sides, like invisible hands tightening around my chest. My head swam with confusion, my heart racing as I tried to make sense of what I had just seen. The lighthouse, the city, the twisted shapes that had once been the Salado sisters. And then Alina, her eyes hollow and lifeless, staring at me with a quiet, impossible sadness. She was here, but not here, trapped in this dimension between worlds just like the others. And I was too. I stumbled back, my breath shallow and ragged, and the walls of the lighthouse seemed to close in on me, distorting the space. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My body was frozen in terror. The whispers, the voices were all around me, louder now, frantic. They seemed to be coming from every corner, from the very walls themselves. "It's too late." The words repeated over and over in my head, Alina's voice still echoing in my mind. But they were wrong. It wasn't too late. I wasn't giving up yet. I had to find a way out. But there was nowhere to go. The room I stood in had no windows, no doors, only the faint glow of the light beam above, casting strange shadows across the cracked stone floor. I looked around, searching for something, anything, that might give me an answer, and then I saw it. At the far end of the room, half hidden behind a broken column, was a narrow staircase leading downward. It wasn't marked, and it didn't belong. The stairs seemed to vanish into the stone floor beneath, as if they led to something far deeper than the lighthouse itself. I didn't hesitate. Something deep inside me told me this was the way. The only way, the hollow. The steps creaked underfoot as I descended into the cold, damp darkness. The air grew thick and heavy, each breath tasting like rot and decay. My heart hammered in my chest, the pounding sound drowning out everything else. The stairs wound down in a spiral, and the further I went, the colder it became. The temperature dropped until it felt like I was walking through a tomb, the chill seeping into my bones. Finally, the stairs ended, and I stepped into a vast underground cavern. The Hollow. It was more than a cavern, though. It was a world. A place that existed outside of time, outside of logic. The walls of the cavern stretched impossibly high, disappearing into a misty blackness above. The ground beneath me was soft, almost spongy, and it squelched with every step I took. A strange, sickly light illuminated the space, coming from nowhere and everywhere all at once. As I moved deeper into the hollow, the air became thick with whispers, voices, too soft to make out clearly, but they were there. In the shadows, in the mist, I could feel them brushing against me like 1,000 cold fingers. Dennis. I stopped dead in my tracks, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. It was Alina's voice again, but it wasn't just her voice. It was distorted, twisted like something trying to escape from her body. Dennis. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just the mist swirling around me like a living thing. My heart pounded in my chest as the air around me seemed to vibrate with an eerie hum, a frequency that made my teeth ache. I wasn't alone. I could hear footsteps now, faint but unmistakable. They were coming from behind me. Someone or something was following me through the hollow. Dennis. The voice called again, this time louder, and I felt a cold hand press against my shoulder. But when I spun around, there was no one there. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I had to keep moving. I had to get out of here. But the footsteps grew louder, closer. The mist swirled around me, thickening until I could barely see my own hands. The whispers were growing louder now, merging into a single, maddening cacophony. Dennis. I turned sharply, my body freezing in place as I saw a figure step out of the mist. It was Alina, but not Alina. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and black as coal. Her mouth hung open in a twisted grin, a grin that stretched too far, too wide, revealing teeth that were jagged and sharp. Alina, I whispered, stepping backward. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her movements were slow, deliberate as she advanced toward me, her body swaying unnaturally. She was no longer the girl I had known. She was something else, something born of this place. You shouldn't have come here. The voice wasn't Alina's anymore. It was deeper, hollow, coming from somewhere inside her. I tried to move, but my legs were heavy, sluggish, like I was wading through thick mud. My breath came in ragged gasps as I forced myself to turn and run, but the mist closed in, swallowing the path before me. I had to escape. I had to. I slammed into something hard. I didn't see it until I was already face down on the cold, wet ground. A wall, a barrier, a wall of black stone that stretched impossibly high. No escape. I looked up, my blood running cold as the figure of Alina loomed above me, her distorted face grinning down at me. Behind her, the mist parted to reveal the true horrors of the hollow. Figures emerged from the shadows, twisted and broken, their bodies warped and contorted in unnatural shapes. They were human once, but now they were something else. Something lost. Something beyond recognition. I was surrounded, trapped. And then the light from the lighthouse above flickered. It was barely visible through the mist, but I saw it, faint and pulsing like the heartbeat of a dying animal. I had to reach it. That was my only chance, if I could just make it back to the lighthouse. The light. I didn't think, I just ran. The ground beneath me was treacherous, the soft earth giving way with every step, but I kept going. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I couldn't stop. I had to reach the light. As I neared the lighthouse, the mist cleared slightly, revealing the towering structure standing against the dark sky. It was still shining, the beam of light sweeping across the horizon, cutting through the fog like a blade. But the closer I got, the darker the air became. The light grew more intense, brighter, blinding me. I could hear the figures from the hollow following me, their footsteps closing in. I reached the base of the lighthouse, my hands trembling as I grabbed the door and yanked it open. The moment I stepped inside, the world shifted again. The air was thick with tension, crackling like static. The light above flickered once more, and then everything went black. The light that sees. The darkness was absolute. I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face, let alone the path I had taken to the lighthouse. The cold pressed in, seeping through my clothes, through my skin, until it felt like I was being consumed by the very air itself. Every breath I took was shallow, my chest tight, my thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. But then there was a faint light, so faint that at first I thought I imagined it. But no, it was there. A pale, flickering beam that pierced the thick, unnatural blackness. It was like a crack in the fabric of reality, a beam of hope cutting through the void. I stumbled forward, my legs shaking beneath me. I couldn't stop myself. The light was pulling me, drawing me closer, urging me forward with an invisible force. Every instinct told me to run in the opposite direction, but I couldn't. The light beckoned. I reached the base of the lighthouse again, the beam shining down from above. But this time it was different. The light seemed to have a pulse. It was alive, growing brighter, then dimming as if it were breathing. And then I heard it, a low hum. It started off faint, like a vibration in the air, but quickly grew louder. The sound was deep and resonant, like a song played on an ancient instrument, reverberating through the very bones of the earth. The lighthouse, it wasn't just a building. It was a doorway. I stepped inside, my body trembling as the door creaked open. The air inside was thick with dust, the walls cracked and peeling, the floor covered in the remnants of old, broken machinery. But there was a strange sense of familiarity about the place, like I had been here before in another life, in another time. The beam of light from above grew stronger as I ascended the spiral staircase. The hum of the lighthouse grew louder, more insistent, like a heartbeat. When I reached the top, I saw it. The light wasn't just shining out into the world, it was focused on something in the distance. A city that shouldn't exist. I could see it faintly through the lens of the lighthouse. The spires stretched high into the sky, their shapes twisted and alien. The buildings weren't made of stone or wood. They seemed to be woven from the very air itself, translucent, shimmering like they were made from glass. And the people, if you could call them people, moved through the streets. Their bodies were elongated, their features indistinct, faces hidden behind masks or completely blank, as if their identities had been stolen. They walked quickly, purposefully, as though they had somewhere to be, somewhere they had to go. But what struck me the most was the way they moved, not like people. They didn't walk or run, they glided, hovering inches above the ground, their movements fluid and unnerving. They were all headed toward something, toward the center of the city, toward the heart of whatever this place was. And then they turned, every one of them, all at once. Their eyes, or whatever they had in place of eyes, turned toward the lighthouse, toward me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. They knew I was here. They knew I was watching them. The air in the lighthouse seemed to crackle with energy, a violent force pressing in from all sides. The walls shook, the light from above flashing in rapid pulses, the hum turning into a full-blown roar. Suddenly I felt it, a coldness creeping into my bones, an overwhelming sense of dread that froze me in place. Something was coming, something was breaking through. The light from the lighthouse flickered and the shadows in the city began to move. The ground beneath me trembled, the walls cracking, the ceiling groaning. And then in the midst of the chaos I heard it, a voice, distant at first but growing louder with every second. "You shouldn't have come." It was Elena's voice, or at least it sounded like her. But there was something wrong with it. The tone was harsh, distorted, like she was being dragged through the air, pulled away from me. I spun around, but no one was there. The lighthouse was empty, just as it had been when I entered. The light, the beam, was still focused on the city below, but now it was growing darker, flickering, as if it were struggling to stay alive. "Dennis." The voice came again, but this time it was closer. So close it was as if she was standing right behind me. I whirled around, but still, there was nothing, no one. Just the dim light from above and the silent hum of the lighthouse growing louder by the second. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the bottom of the stairs. I didn't need to see them clearly to know who it was. I knew that silhouette. The posture, the way they moved, it was unmistakable. It was Elena, but this wasn't the Elena I had known. This was something else. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and vacant. Her skin was stretched too tight, her features distorted like a reflection in a broken mirror. She was not the girl who had called me for help. She was a ghost, a thing that had been twisted by the lighthouse, by the very light that had brought me here. Her lips parted, and the voice that came out wasn't hers. It was guttural, like something far older, something that had been buried beneath the earth for centuries. "You don't belong here, Dennis." I backed away, my heart racing in my chest. The lighthouse was no longer just a building. It was alive. And it was calling to me, pulling me in, pulling me towards something far darker than I could comprehend. I turned and bolted for the stairs, my legs trembling beneath me, but the way out was blocked. The door was gone. The walls closed in around me, the light from above pulsating like a living thing, blinding me with its intensity. "You will never leave," Elena's voice echoed around me. I reached for the door, but it was no use. The light was everywhere now, suffocating me, pushing me toward the edge of the abyss. And then the world went black, a new reality. I don't know how long I was unconscious. It could have been minutes, hours, or days. When I woke, the world around me was still and silent, but it felt wrong. The air was thick with something I couldn't name. It was cold, like the breath of the dead, and the taste in my mouth was bitter, metallic, as if I had been sucking on iron nails. I forced myself to my feet, but my legs were weak, trembling beneath me. I looked around, but the lighthouse was gone. I was no longer standing in that crumbling, oppressive tower of light. Instead, I was somewhere else. Somewhere that felt like a memory, a place half-formed in my mind but impossible to fully grasp. The walls around me were slick and black like oil-soaked stone, and the floor was soft, yielding under my weight, as though I was standing on flesh. The ceiling above was high, too high, its edges dissolving into darkness, the air thick with a low hum that vibrated my bones. And then I saw it. The walls were covered with faces, dozens of them, hundreds, their features stretched and warped, distorted in ways I couldn't comprehend. Some were old, their skin shriveled, their eyes sunken and hollow. Others were fresh, still alive in some twisted sense, their mouths open in silent screams, their eyes wide with terror. The faces moved, shifting ever so slightly as if they were alive. I stumbled back, a scream rising in my throat, but it caught in my chest. There was no sound, no echo, just that deafening hum, that constant drone filling my ears. "Dennis." The voice came again, softer now, more insistent. "Elena," but not Elena. The voice was deeper, darker, the voice of something ancient, something that didn't belong in this world. I looked around, my head spinning. The faces on the walls, they were staring at me, watching me. "You shouldn't have come." The voice wasn't coming from anywhere. It was coming from within me, inside my skull, echoing in my mind, scratching at my thoughts like claws on glass. The pressure was unbearable. I grabbed my head, trying to block out the sound, but it only grew louder, more frantic. I tried to move, to run, but the floor seemed to shift beneath me. The faces, they were closing in. The walls stretched, the room twisted, and suddenly I was no longer alone. The figures stepped from the shadows, emerging from the very walls themselves. They were tall, their bodies covered in dark robes, their faces hidden behind masks that reflected nothing, blank, empty voids staring back at me. They moved with a slow, deliberate grace, like shadows of something that had once been human. And then I realized what they were. They weren't alive. They weren't dead either. They were something in between. A liminal existence, trapped between worlds, like the ones who had been lost here, like the Salado sisters, like Elena. They were the lost souls of Ashwood, imprisoned here, bound to this place, forever repeating the cycle of their deaths and disappearances. One of them stepped forward, its masked face turning toward me, its hand outstretched as if to touch me. "Do you want to know what's on the other side?" The words echoed in my mind, not spoken but felt. They weren't offering a choice. The question was a command, an invitation, one that I couldn't refuse. I shook my head, but it didn't matter. The figure moved closer, its hand brushing lightly against my cheek. The touch was cold, like ice, sending a jolt of fear through my spine. And with that touch, the world around me changed. The floor beneath me gave way and I fell. The world below. The fall felt like an eternity. I was weightless, my body tumbling through the air, through the blackness. The walls closed in, the faces on the stone growing larger, their mouths opening wider as though they were preparing to swallow me whole. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the fall stopped. I slammed into something soft but firm, like wet earth, and rolled to a stop. My head spun and I could taste blood in my mouth. I slowly opened my eyes and the sight before me made my stomach churn. I was in the middle of a vast, decaying city, but this wasn't Ashwood. This wasn't even the world I knew. This was something far worse, something darker, something ancient. The buildings were twisted, their spires reaching up into the sky like claws, grasping for something just out of reach. The streets were cracked, covered in a thick, oily substance that shimmered in the dim light. The air smelled like rot, like death. And standing in the center of the city, towering over everything, was the lighthouse. But it wasn't just any lighthouse. This one was different. It was alive, its surface shifting and writhing like the skin of some monstrous creature. The light at the top flickered, casting shadows that danced and stretched as if they had a mind of their own. The figures that had followed me here were standing in the distance, their shapes blurry and indistinct. They were moving, walking toward the lighthouse, but they didn't walk like humans. They glided, their limbs too long, their bodies too fluid. They moved with purpose, like they were headed toward something important, something that had been waiting for them. I stood up, my legs shaking beneath me. I had to get out of here. I had to find a way back to the real world, but there was no way out. The city stretched for miles, the twisted buildings forming an endless labyrinth of horrors. "Dennis." The voice came again, but this time it wasn't Elena. It was something else, something deeper, something that resonated in my very bones. I turned, and there she was, Elena. But again, not Elena. Her eyes were empty, hollow, black voids that seemed to stare into my soul. Her mouth was open, but there was no sound, no scream, just silence. "You shouldn't be here, Dennis." I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I was trapped in this nightmare, in this place between worlds where the rules of reality no longer applied. There is no escape. The voice echoed around me, and I felt the ground beneath me begin to tremble. The city was alive, breathing, shifting, changing. It was pulling me in, drawing me deeper into its web. I turned to run, but the ground gave way beneath me again. I fell, tumbling through the air, the darkness closing in around me. But this time it wasn't the same. This time I knew what was waiting for me. I knew that I wasn't alone. I was never meant to leave. The doorway. I slammed into the ground once more, but this time there was no mistaking where I was. The cold, slick walls of the lighthouse surrounded me, and I realized that I had fallen into it. I had entered the very heart of this place, the doorway to the other world. The walls closed in, the hum growing louder, more insistent. The figures were closing in around me, their faces blank, their eyes empty, and I knew that I was trapped. There was no way back, no way out. I stood up slowly, the weight of the realization pressing down on me. The city, the lighthouse, Elena, they were all part of the same thing. A prison, a trap, a place where the lost souls of Ashwood were kept, forever repeating their cycle of death and torment. And now I was one of them. The abyss beckons. I could feel the city closing in around me, the air thick with something ancient, something malignant. The distorted figures that had been following me, moving with impossible fluidity, were now circling, their hollow eyes fixated on me. It wasn't just fear that gripped me anymore. It was something deeper, a primal terror that clawed at my insides. It was as if the very walls of the hollow were alive, watching, waiting for something. Waiting for me. The lighthouse loomed above, its black stone pulsing with an eerie glow. It beckoned me just like it had before, but now the invitation felt more like a command. I couldn't explain it, but I knew. If I didn't go to it, the hollow would swallow me whole. There was no escape. Not anymore. I took a step forward, my legs shaking beneath me, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The ground beneath me shifted as I moved, the oily substance beneath my feet making every step feel like I was sinking into the earth. I wasn't sure if I was walking or floating, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except reaching the lighthouse. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hollow, loud and purposeful. I spun around, my heart leaping in my chest, and saw them. Figures. More of them. They were coming toward me, twisted, deformed versions of the townspeople, their faces contorted in grotesque expressions. They weren't just bodies, they were shadows, flickering in and out of existence like they didn't belong to any world. Dennis. The voice came again, soft at first, then louder, deeper. Elena's voice, but it was not her. It was the entity that had taken her, that had taken everyone in this town. It was the voice of the hollow itself. Come to me. I shook my head, trying to block out the sound, but it was impossible. The voice seemed to vibrate through every cell in my body. It wasn't a command, it was a promise. The promise of something far worse than death. It wanted me, it needed me. And somehow I knew it would get me. I turned and sprinted toward the lighthouse. The figures in the shadows followed, their movements faster now, almost too quick to track. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the air had shifted. The temperature had dropped, the once warm, stifling air now cold as ice, biting into my skin with every step. The hollow was shifting. It was reacting to me. I reached the base of the lighthouse and grabbed the door, but it didn't open. It was sealed shut like it had been waiting for this moment. I pulled harder, desperation clawing at me as the figures closed in, their whispers growing louder. They were chanting now, the words strange and alien but unmistakable in their intent. He's here, he's here. Dennis. I slammed my shoulder against the door, forcing it open with all the strength I had left. The door gave way with a creak, just enough to allow me to slip inside. The figures screamed in fury behind me, their cries a distorted chorus of torment and rage. The heart of the hollow. Inside the lighthouse, the air was thick with a sense of foreboding. The walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, the light from above flickering in rhythmic patterns like a heart beating in the dark. I could feel it. The presence. The entity was here, waiting. The beam from the lighthouse's light was now more than just a beam. It was a conduit, a bridge between the worlds and the hollow. The dark city I had found myself in was the price of that bridge. The walls here weren't just stone. They were a membrane, a skin stretched thin, separating two worlds that shouldn't exist together. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't just trapped here. I was part of the trap. I stepped into the center of the room, my breath shallow as I tried to steady myself. There in the center of the floor was a massive altar, its surface covered in strange runes and symbols that seemed to shift and writhe with their own life. The symbols were the same ones from the book I had found in Samantha's room, the book with the ancient language I couldn't understand. But now I knew what they meant, and they meant something terrible. The air around the altar buzzed with dark energy, and as I moved closer, I saw them. The faces. They were etched into the stone, their expressions frozen in terror, their eyes wide and unblinking, and they were staring at me. Dennis. The voice came again, louder now, shaking the very foundations of the lighthouse. I turned, and standing in the doorway, I saw her. Elena, but not Elena. She was different, twisted. Her body was thin, almost skeletal, her skin pale and stretched tight over her bones. Her eyes were hollow, black pools of emptiness, but behind them, I saw something else, something that was not her, the entity. It was inside her, it had taken her. "You shouldn't have come, Dennis," she said, her voice echoing with 1,000 voices, all distorted and broken. I backed away, my hands trembling. I had to stop this. I had to find a way to end it before it consumed me, before it consumed the world. I reached into my pocket, my fingers closing around the cold steel of the gun I had carried with me. It felt useless in my hands. What could a gun do against this? But I couldn't just stand here. I had to fight. I had to try. I raised the gun, but before I could pull the trigger, the ground beneath me cracked open, a black abyss swallowing the floor. I fell, tumbling through the air, the darkness closing in around me. And then I was somewhere else. The city of the lost. I landed on the cold stone, my body aching from the fall. I looked up and found myself in the middle of the city. But this wasn't Ashwood. This wasn't any place I recognized. The city stretched on forever, its spires rising high above, twisted and contorted as if they were alive. And there, standing in the center of it all, was the entity. The thing that had been pulling the strings of Ashwood, the thing that had taken Elena and everyone else in this town. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything that could be defined by words. It was a mass of shadows and flesh, its form shifting and changing with every blink. It was watching me. It was waiting. And then I saw them, the Salado sisters. They were standing in the city, their eyes vacant, their bodies contorted in unnatural ways. They were lost, trapped. "Help us," they whispered. "Help us, Dennis." But I couldn't help them, not anymore, the final choice. The entity's presence grew stronger, pressing in on me from all sides. The air was thick with its power. I could feel it like a pressure in my chest, suffocating me. There was no escape, no way out. I had only one choice. I had to face the entity. I had to stop it. I turned toward the lighthouse, knowing what I had to do. I had to destroy the light. I had to destroy the gateway between worlds. But before I could take another step, the figures of the city closed in on me, their faces twisted in silent screams. The hollow was alive, and it was pulling me deeper into its grasp. The light flickered once more, and I knew, with a certainty I couldn't explain, that it would end here. The door to the abyss was opening, and it was my choice to cross. The last light. The city around me seemed to shift, as if the very fabric of reality was warping, stretching, and bending. My body felt as though it was being pulled in multiple directions at once. My mind, my soul, all twisted by the unseen forces. The weight of it was unbearable, And yet, the longer I stood there, the more I realized something crucial. I wasn't just a bystander in this nightmare. I was part of it. The air in the hollow was thick with despair, thick with the essence of the souls that had been lost to it. The faces of the townspeople, twisted, broken, lost, lingered in the shadows, their eyes hollow, their voices whispers in the dark. "Help us!" They seemed to call to me, their words desperate, but their pleas were lost in the growing roar of the entity that loomed behind them, feeding off the fear and grief. The entity. I had seen it in Alina's eyes. It wasn't just a creature from another dimension, it was a force. A consuming darkness that fed on souls, on the lost, on those desperate enough to reach into the unknown. And now it was feeding on me. I stumbled forward, every step like a struggle against the weight of the world itself. I had to stop it. I had to. If I didn't, this place, Ashwood, the hollow, everything, would be swallowed whole. The gateway between worlds would open wide and no one would be safe. I could feel the pressure of the light above me, the lighthouse's beam pulsing, beating like the heart of some great beast, its light reaching through the darkness, flickering in the abyss. It had to be destroyed. But as I walked toward the beam, a strange thing happened. The light seemed to shift, the shadows recoiling from it like the very essence of the hollow was retreating before it. For a brief moment, the air seemed to clear, the whispers fading into silence. The city's twisted figures froze, their bodies still, their eyes fixed on me as though they were waiting for the light to either swallow me or allow me to destroy it. It was my choice. I reached out with trembling hands toward the beam, but before I could make contact, the ground beneath me cracked open once more. This time, there was no soft landing. There was only the sheer, unrelenting descent into the darkness below. I fell. The void beyond. I don't know how long I was falling. Time lost all meaning here. It could have been seconds or it could have been centuries. The world around me was an endless abyss, dark and empty, a void that stretched on forever. There was no up, no down, only the feeling of falling. But then I felt it, a pull. A tug, as though something was drawing me in, pulling me toward it against my will. The darkness around me began to form, shifting, taking shape until I could see it. The thing that had been calling me all this time, the entity, it was waiting for me. I didn't want to face it. I didn't want to acknowledge it, but I couldn't escape it. It was a force, a presence, older than anything I had ever known. It existed between the worlds, a being made of shadows and nightmares, born from the darkest corners of human despair. And it was feeding on my soul. I slammed into the ground with an agonizing thud, my body racked with pain. But there was no time to process it. I forced myself up, my vision blurred, my head spinning. The hollow had taken me deep into its heart, into the very source of its power. And there, standing in front of me, was the entity, its form shifting and changing, never fully solid, never fully real. Its face was a blur, a mass of swirling darkness and light, its eyes countless, their endless gazes boring into my soul. Dennis. The voice wasn't Alina's anymore. It was the voice of the hollow, the voice of everything that had been lost, the voice of the void itself. "You've come to stop me, but you don't understand. You cannot escape what you are." I tried to speak, to say something, but my mouth felt dry, my tongue thick and useless. The words wouldn't come. The entity's power was suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides, its presence overwhelming. "You belong to this place now, Dennis. You are one of the lost. You always have been. The light you seek to destroy is the only thing that keeps you from becoming one of them." The faces around me shifted, the figures of the lost souls in the hollow emerging from the mist, their twisted forms moving closer. They were beckoning me, calling me into their ranks. I could feel the weight of their gaze, the hunger in their eyes. They wanted me to join them, to become part of the city's endless cycle of torment and despair. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. The final choice, the light, the lighthouse beam, it had to be destroyed. It was the only way to stop the hollow from consuming everything. I knew that now. I reached into my pocket, my fingers closing around the cold, familiar shape of the gun. I didn't know if it would work against the entity, but I had no other choice. It was my last chance. I raised the gun, the trembling barrel aimed at the entity before me, and I fired. The sound of the gunshot was deafening, but it was followed by a silence so deep it swallowed everything. I couldn't see what happened, couldn't hear anything, but the air around me shifted. The pressure that had been weighing on me began to dissipate, slowly at first, then faster. The ground beneath me began to tremble, shaking violently, as though the very fabric of the hollow was coming apart. The figures around me screamed in agony, their forms disintegrating, their tortured souls finally freed from their eternal prison. And then the entity itself let out a scream, a terrible, guttural cry that reverberated through the hollow. It was a sound of fury, of final defeat. The light from the lighthouse above flickered and then went dark, and the hollow began to collapse. Aftermath. I woke in my bed, the harsh sunlight streaming through the window, the familiar hum of the town outside. It was quiet, peaceful, but it wasn't real. I wasn't in Ashwood anymore. I wasn't in the hollow. I wasn't even sure where I was. The light from the lighthouse had faded, but it wasn't gone. The city still existed somewhere, waiting, and I knew deep down that the entity would return. The price for salvation had been steep, but I had chosen to face the darkness, to confront the entity that had tormented so many, and in doing so I had given up everything. My wife, my child, the life I had known, all gone, lost in the battle to stop the hollow from consuming everything. But I would carry their memory. I would carry the light, even if it meant walking alone through the darkness. And as I stepped out into the streets of Ashwood once more, I knew that this battle would never truly be over. Not as long as the hollow existed, not as long as the light shone. And I would be ready. The story of Dennis, an Ohio cop who unwittingly stumbles upon the road to hell, is one of both horror and introspection. It is a tale that takes us through the shadows of a town forgotten by time, a journey where one man confronts both the supernatural and the darkest corners of his own soul. Throughout his harrowing adventure, Dennis is forced to grapple with a truth that transcends the physical horror around him. His struggle is not only against the malevolent force that threatens to consume Ashwood, but also against his own grief, guilt, and loss. When Dennis first arrives in Ashwood, he is merely seeking refuge from his troubled past, hoping that the quiet isolation of a small, forgotten town might offer him some peace. Little does he know, the town is far from ordinary. Ashwood, hidden from all maps and filled with dark secrets, becomes a symbol of the labyrinth we all must face when we refuse to confront our past. The town is a reflection of Dennis's own psyche. Haunted by the tragic loss of his wife and child, he finds himself trapped in a place that blurs the line between the living and the dead. From the moment he encounters the Salado sisters, whose past is shrouded in mystery, to the discovery of the lighthouse that holds the key to an alternate reality, Dennis's journey becomes an emotional and physical descent into madness. But what starts as an investigation into a missing girl soon transforms into something far deeper. He realizes that Ashwood is not merely a town trapped in time, but but a place where lost souls are bound in an endless cycle of torment and despair. And as the entity lurking within the hollow begins to show its true power, Dennis is forced to reckon with his own role in the cycle, his grief, his past, his inability to let go. The turning point in Dennis's journey comes when he descends into the hollow, a dark dimension where the laws of reality no longer apply. It is here that the true horror of his situation is revealed. The faces of the lost souls, the figures that move in unnatural ways, the whispers that fill the air, all these are manifestations of the fear, guilt, and pain that have bound these souls to the hollow. And Dennis realizes that, like them, he too has been trapped by his unresolved grief, his inability to accept his past, and his desire to save what is already lost. But it is through this confrontation with the darkness, both external and internal, that Dennis finds his strength. The ultimate battle he faces is not just against the entity that seeks to control Ashwood, but against the very essence of despair that has clouded his heart. In a moment of clarity, Dennis understands that the only way to escape the cycle of torment is not through vengeance or destruction, but through acceptance. He must confront the truth of his loss and let go of the need for closure that has kept him chained to the past. As Dennis reaches the final confrontation in the lighthouse, the light that he seeks to destroy becomes a symbol of hope, of the possibility of moving forward. The lighthouse is not just a gateway between worlds, but a reminder that even in the darkest places, light can shine. And by choosing to destroy the light, Dennis also chooses to destroy the cycle of grief that has held him captive for so long. In the end, Dennis's sacrifice, his willingness to let go of his past and face the darkness, is what ultimately frees the town of Ashwood, but at a great personal cost. The hollow collapses, but so does Dennis's connection to the world he once knew. He is left with nothing but the knowledge that he can never truly return, that some things are lost forever. But in this loss, there is freedom. Dennis's journey ends not with a return to normalcy, but with a painful yet profound understanding that the road to hell is not just a place, but a state of mind, a place we all enter when we refuse to face the truth of our own existence. If you've found yourself moved by Dennis's journey, if you've seen pieces of your own struggles in his fight against the hollow, then I encourage you to reflect on your own life. What are you holding on to? What fears, regrets, or grief are keeping you trapped in your own version of Ashwood? If you enjoyed this story and want to see more content that challenges, inspires, and entertains, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps us going, helping us create more stories that push boundaries, make you think, and give you the strength to face your own darkness. Together, we can embark on more journeys into the unknown, discovering the lessons that lie hidden in the shadows. Subscribe now and join us on this journey. There's always more to uncover.